Welcome back to the class, everyone. You guys know the drill. It's been about 3 or 4 months, so it's time to take every GAC team out there, put them in order from best to worst, excluding Galactic Legends because they take a long time to farm. So as per usual, the way that we rank this out is we're going to start with the absolute best teams that are already beating Galactic Legends on a very consistent basis. A lot of them are doing so at the extent of Omicrons, which are specifically made for GACs, so they're not necessarily going to perform the same way in every single game mode. Then the way the rest of the ranking is going to work is if these are the teams that consistently beat Galactic Legends, the next ranking of teams are going to be the ones that beat those ones, and kind of so on and so forth, ranking everything all the way out. And I do realize we're going to be talking about 40 teams, despite the fact that you only really need 22 for 5v5. And the reason for that is not everyone has 11.5 million GP for their roster. Not really trying to gloat there, but it is what it is. So again, the whole point for this is for anybody to watch this and to look at it and be like, okay, I only have, 20 of these teams. These are the order that I'm in, so I know how much they're worth. I know what to work on next, etc. So first off, we are getting into a very new addition, and that is going to be Bo-Katan Mandalore. Really not going to spend a lot of time on her with her Omicrons, even without the Datacron. Totally schools Lord Vader. It's not even a problem. Bo-Katan as the 5th isn't necessarily necessary. You can use armor in there. Armor just has a tendency to be a little bit more versatile outside of the comp. So overall, doing a lot of good work and really fits the category for an S tier team to be able to be beating a Galactic Legend consistently. Next one is going to be Maul. And I have been very hesitant and patient to put this team in the S tier ranking. It has typically fallen in the A tier, which is still really good. But what GAR and ISC are doing right now is absolutely ridiculous. Even when you put in a very small amount of investment to them, like I have at Relic 3, ISC is basically just allowing both him and Gar Saxon to deal a disgusting amount of true damage when they attack at a turn, which happens every single time when Maul is their leader, because that's what his leadership does. It calls the other Mandalorians outside to assist. Now, this isn't the comp that you have to build to be able to take out JMKs. I do kind of like it just because it really takes away a lot of the nuance to modding. Gar, ISC, or Kandor Sordo can be the healthiest. Cat will leap any one of them, doesn't really matter, because Dark Trooper Moff Gideon, when he has this leadership, he can bring all dark side Mandos back to life via one of his special abilities. I believe it's this one right here. Might be the other one, not really important, but he can do that. So you have some freedom and some flexibility for this to be able to take out JMK. If you're like, Calvin, that's really dumb, I want to use Dark Trooper Moff Gideon on a Imperial Remnant team, totally fine. Just throw in Django. He revives himself. Just make sure he has the most health and protection. So he is the one that is eating the initial elite from the enemy cat to be able to take out those JMKs. Next up is Starkiller, aka everyone's favorite Ray counter. Is not as consistent as we would like him to be, especially with the amount of Datacrons that are around there, but realistically, whenever Ray gets a really good Datacron, the Starkiller counter suffers, and so do the other 3 or 4 counters that already exist. So for the most part, still taking them out at a good rate. Next up is going to be Malgus. While we had, Starkiller beating Ray very well, and we had Maul beating JMK very well, Malgus is going to find more use on defense or beating the other teams here. He can beat JML. Almost nobody is leaving Jedi Master Luke on defense. That being said, you can take Sith Empire and you can go and beat Inquisitors. You can go and beat the Seer team down below. You can beat a lot of these other teams that are very high ranking. And yeah, if someone does want to throw every single GL against you, you can use them to beat JML. So very overall, great team. Does require the leadership from Malgus on the Omicron to really take Darth Revan to that next level. Even if you don't have the Omicron, Malgus is still the best leader because stops troopers pretty hard. Next up is going to be Inquisitorius. Really just an absolutely fantastic faction ever since we got Third Sister. She has locked healing immune on her special, and that's pretty much all it took to kill both JMK and JML with a good amount of ease. In fact, you don't even really need the leadership Omicron, although it is very helpful, especially for JMK that is cleansing constantly and will just end up having to eat those death marks. Next up is the Seer team. I quite like it on defense. It pretty much requires a Galactic Legend to take down, but there are a lot of people out there that found it to be very useful in taking out Ray, because Malakos himself is going to get repost, which is going to allow him to hit under protection, including all the bonus protection or protection up or whatever the purple stuff is Ray gives to her team to be able to make them tankier. He just kind of goes right under it when he's assisting out of turn, which is kind of what his whole kit does in the first place. You can also throw Maul in there to make it even better. But overall, these teams are consistently beating Galactic Legends or just an absolute nightmare to deal with on defense, which is why they are going to fall into our S tier. Next up is going to be our A tier teams. These teams are going to sometimes beat the teams above. A great example of that would be the Treya team being able to handle the Maul team just because they're going to be attacking out of turn constantly and, you know, eventually just kill themselves. But the rest of this is going to kind of ring true. And even some of these teams in certain situations are going to be able to take down Galactic Legends as well. They're really going to have to either need a Datacron to do so, or they are going to need to be fighting, quite frankly, a weaker version of the best Galactic Legend team. Like, Treya will beat the JML team, but again, JML isn't really placed on defense that much. Next up is going to be Knight's Table. If you're willing to throw every single character into the team, you can challenge a lot of the JMK teams out there. It's going to be pretty difficult right now without the Datacron, but it's still very much possible, so that's kind of why they end up here. It is expensive, and realistically, you're probably going to be splitting up your Jedi teams into more ways than this, especially for those of you who do have JML, but for the most part, this is the ultimate culmination of what this team can do, and it's very effective. Next up is going to be our good friend, the Phoenix with Sexy Rexy, I guess is what a lot of people are calling him, so we're just going to roll with that for the video. This team right here just completely schools Inquisitors. Obviously not right now with the Doubtcron going around, but for everybody who doesn't have to fight Inquisitors with the Doubtcron, they just completely run them over because I won't get into the super specifics of it, but basically how Commander Rex's kit works is every single time his allies get debuffs, he gets turn meter, and every single time you hit an Inquisitor, you get a ton of Purge. They attack at a turn. It happens a ton. Just completely crushes it. Overall, great team. They beat a ton of other stuff too, but just kind of using the Inquisitors as a benchmarker for the best team they can beat. They can also kind of challenge Job in some situations, so that is very awesome. Next up is going to be General Skywalker, an overall fantastic team. Again, when we're looking at outside counters to Galactic Legends, he will beat Lord Vader if they don't have ultimate, if you're in that very specific situation. There'll also be JMK without Cat. Kind of, again, a rare situation. And even beyond that, he does have a pretty good shot at taking down Malgus or even Seer, depending on the build, Relics, Datacrons, etc. Overall, great team. Kind of a pain to beat on defense unless you have CLS, which in case you're probably doing pretty good. Next up is going to be Finn. We have no idea how well this team does on offense because it is, quite frankly, amazing on defense and just such a pain in the butt to handle. They have so many cleanses, so many attacks out of turn, so many exposes. They just have so many ways to get around everything that we're doing to them. There are obviously counters out there that'll beat them, but for something to get out of hand, it gets out of hand very quickly, and the team ultimately becomes very hard to take down when put on defense, and you give a ton of atrocious speed to Resistant Seraphim and or Zori Bliss. Next up is going to be CLS, probably the most staple of all staples for Galaxy of Heroes teams. Overall, it's amazing. It'll beat a lot of the other teams that are already in this category, like General Skywalker that we previously mentioned. But again, every single time that the Wookiees, or the Scoundrels, or the Rebels, or the whatever in this team gets a Datacron, a really good one, they end up beating Jabba pretty consistently. It's actually one of my favorite counters out there. Can't use it all the time unless the Jabba team just kind of isn't good, but for the most part, fantastic team. Again, they'll challenge a lot of the other stuff that is in this same exact category. Next up was Grievous, and this one you might not want to cash in on just quite yet. A lot of this is speculation and very limited testing about what Stop is doing to the General Grievous team. He has a lot of mechanics that are mirroring what Newt was already doing, except maybe better. I still don't really know if this is going to consistently hold against Wampa. I'm guessing not, just because Stop's AI isn't at all the best, and the max health damage that, or the max health that he's adding to Grievous is probably not going to be enough in most situations, but regardless, the team can beat some of the weaker C and JML comps, which is really what this whole category is for. Next up, we're going to be M-Troopers, a team that is like just barely making it into the A-tier squad. They are, again, pretty good, but you are pretty much waiting for any of the top tier teams to not have something in particular to hold them up. What I mean by that is the only version of SLKR they beat is the SLKR that doesn't have Hux, which is, again, enough to put them in this category, but almost not relevant at all. They can beat Starkiller when put on defense if you give them Watt so that they can get a bunch of turn meter right out the gate, but that is kind of expensive and is going to interfere with some of the other teams. So maybe they'll get knocked down to the B tier teams later on, but for now, they're going to hold on for at least one last time. Next up is going to be Afra, a character who right now with her Datacron is causing a ton of problems, or really solutions, because everybody's using her on offense to kill Jabba as well as other really strong teams like the current Saw Turret Datacron. Overall, they do have viability without the Datacron, but you're going to have to change the team up a little bit, drop IG-88 for B2, and you have a somewhat reliable Jabba counter if you can line everything up. Buff immunity, Vader gets a big hit, kill Boosh in the very beginning, and just hopefully run the rest of the team. Next up is going to be a team that almost nobody uses because more people have JMK than have Cat, but if you do, or if you are in that really weird position where you have unlocked Commander Ahsoka Tano, don't have JMK yet, you can use this Padme comp to be able to take down actually other JMK teams. It does require a very specific mod and turn order, but it is possible and was something that we used to rely on quite a bit back when it was normal to have Cat and not JMK. Moving on to the B tier list. So these are obviously the best teams. They also take forever to get. The A tier list, not as long to get them, but still kind of a pretty heavy investments with almost the entire teams needing relics the majority of the time. Your B tier teams, you're going to want to pick and choose which ones of these you want to use, assuming you have a full roster. But realistically, most of these you're going to get a really good return for. Not as good as the A tier or, the S tier ones, but B tier is still going to provide quite a bit of room. And what we're really looking for here is taking a lot of the requirements that you've already built up for Galactic Legends or Leviathan or whatever it is, and making good teams out of those. First up is going to be something that was not really allowed for the longest time, and that is the good Trench team. I've not really been a big fan of Trench for the longest time, and it was never because Trench was bad. It was because Jango wanted to play with Maul, Newt wanted to play with Grievous, Watt wanted to play with C. Everything that CG has done in the last 3 to 6 months has essentially fixed every single one of those problems. And you can still keep doing what you were doing before and, throw Trench with Geonosians, but now you really have the freedom to do so. So up here, it beats a lot of fairly good teams. Not all that great on defense. Bounty Hunters and Troopers still just kind of run over it because there's nothing to stop them from going after Admiral Trench right away. And they gain quite a bit of speed just because Wat Tambor's tech isn't all that great, but they have a lot of the offensive tools to be able to take down bigger teams and really to clean up most of the Galactic Legends between shock, ability block, extortion, stagger, healing immunity, stun, a lot of different tools to take down a lot of different stuff. Next up is going to be Saw, and I don't know if he's going to stay in the B category. I feel like we might be getting him a little bit confused with Turret's Datacron right now overall, but he's not a bad team. You do need to get him up for a Cal, and you do have some other Rebel fighters that are required for other events, kind of like Cara Dune is required for Mando, and maybe even Kyle Katarn, who is required for Starkiller, that you can start to fill out the team. But for the most part, Chirrut and Baze are necessary, which is kind of hard to ask for. While they don't require Chirotex, they're also just not required for anything. But overall, pretty fun team on defense right now that is not as trivialized by Iden as we once thought it was going to be. So fairly good team. Don't have to have it, but it is an option for a good B team. Next up is Tuskens. Really shine a lot more in 3v3. They're okay in 5v5. Mostly you want to use them on offense just because they have really specific mechanics to deal with turn meter teams such as CLS, Phoenix, Troopers. Once you put them on defense and somebody takes in a team that doesn't use a lot of turn meter gain like Qui-Gon Jinn, they're just going to get completely run over. Bad Batch. Love Bad Batch. Very expensive, I realize that Chirotech wise, but once you get them, they are a solution to so many different teams, a lot of which are in this category, and maybe even some of them are above here, like the General Grievous team, although that might be hindered a little bit by stop right now. You might be stopping that. Wampa as well, another counter that we've talked about that is able to handle a lot of other stuff in this category, kind of like Iden or Grievous or what have you. And really, most of Wampa's value isn't the fact that he, is beating tough teams, but is that he's doing it entirely on his own, which has a lot of intrinsic value within itself. Next up is going to be Qui-Gon Jinn, who did get the recent reinforcement of Kelleron back. That doesn't seem to have shut down the counters to Qui-Gon Jinn, but it does just overall make the team a lot better. Bad Batch went from being a 90% counter to a 60% counter, so you can still get it to work if you're willing to learn everything how it is supposed to be. with how you need to draw out the healing immunity and the stuns and things like that, because he has changed the dynamic and made it a lot less intuitive than it used to be. And overall, I just love the team on offense. It can challenge a lot of this higher up stuff, because if you can get them to trigger Jedi Anakin's big hit on the right turn, it will just start to level a lot of the stronger teams that are out there. Overall, love the Qui-Gon Jinn team. Great B team. We have Versio as well. She is still kind of stealing a lot of the remnants out there, just because there aren't really enough teams to make 3 Imperial Remnant or Imperial Trooper teams. If you're like Calvin, I don't care about Iden Versio. In fact, I don't care about Veers. I just want my Dark Trooper Moff Gideon. Dark Trooper Moff Gideon is realistically probably somewhere in the A tier. Right now, the Datacron is actually in the higher tier. But just for the sake of the argument, we can only make so many teams. And the Dark Trooper Moff Gideon, he has another place that it can be used just for the sake of not wanting to repeat characters for this. So we're using this Iden team. Pretty cool overall. Beats a lot of the other Rebel teams that are out there, because they love to assist out of turn for the most part. Next up is Adrad, a very nice counter to Iden, kind of being in the same category. I do love Adrad a lot on offense, while Bad Batch do kind of school him on defense, as we previously mentioned. He does have the opportunity to take down almost every single Empire team on defense, excluding Lord Vader, kind of Inquisitors, as well as Starkiller, which I guess isn't really an Empire team. But a lot of the other teams it can beat. And even if you're willing to super mod and relic and get all the tanks on the team, they even have an outside shot at Inquisitors, depending on the Datacron and everything like that. Next up is going to be Bounty Hunters. Bounty Hunters actually got demoted from the last list to this one, and the reason is twofold. Number one, on average, People's Lord Vader teams have gotten a lot better, both because new characters have come out and just because people don't really have Relic 3 Royal Guard, or at least they don't nearly as much as they used to. Bounty Hunters are now about like a 17% success rate against Lord Vader, meaning that they should be more viewed as a cleanup option or a Hail Mary than they should be an actual reliable counter. In addition to that, Bo-Katan stole BAM and is doing the same thing for better. So for rosters without her, which I am included in, this is still kind of the end game team that I'm going to be looking at building. It does beat a lot of stuff, as we previously mentioned. It will take out the trench team up top just because they can immediately run in. You can get contract pretty much instantly by putting this together. You can actually replace Fennec Shand for Zam if you do have her Omicron for an extra speed bonus. Line up Bosk and Grief to go back to back. That way, regardless of if you're hitting a tank, the most healthiest, the least healthiest, someone with a debuff, doesn't matter, because Aura Singh's contract is pretty cool. If you're wondering why I have her Relic 8, it has nothing to do with her GAC viability. It is because platoons, and that's pretty much it. So don't read into that decision all that much. Next up is going to be our Dash team. Quite lovely to have on defense. Tons of different problems going on here at the same time. Dash himself does a lot of damage. You have to worry about who Hondo is going to lock up. That does mess with a bunch of counters, specifically Bounty Hunters and Imperial Troopers that like to get out front and just start killing things right at the bat. He does have a tendency to stop that with his Omicron because he gets to go first and trap someone up. Vandor adds the element of revives to L3, which makes her even more of a pain in the butt to deal with because she just keeps coming back, and really anyone but Honda will keep coming back. So great team overall, causing a lot of issues for opponents because there's just so many different things going on. Next up are Night Sisters. We kind of took them out of the A tier category just because the Jabba counter is so wildly niche and really requires you to hold back relics on even important high relic characters like Old Daka. But for the most part, it does have a shot at a lot of the other good teams, with Marin finally giving them their much needed cleanse. I've also gotten a lot of comments, or really questions, about why we're using this comp of Night Sisters. It is not the end all be all for Night Sister comps, but when you put Night Sister Initiate or really any really weak Night Sister in there, you give the opportunity for all 4 of these to die and for Marin to just get into 100% turn meter loop, knocking everyone out. Depending on what you're going up against, Zombie might be the right option, especially if they have any type of permakill. But at that point, I might question why you're using Night Sisters in the first place if the enemy team has a permakill. So again, reviewing S tier comps, amazing, take forever to get. Do what you can. A tier comps, these are really your bread and butter. They're what you want to be using most of the time. B tier, pick and choose which ones you want, which ones you don't want, and kind of go from there. Next, we're going to move into the C tier. As you see, we have passed into 27, meaning most of these teams, while good, should be seen as transitory, because a lot of the teams that we've already talked about are just better than them in every single way. One of the things you're going to see very highly in here are characters that are requirements that can be knitted together to build real teams that can at least do something, versus other teams that are just kind of garbage, which these, again, are not. So first up is going to be the sortie team. Again, this is just requirement galore. It's a great example of what we were just talking about. You need Sortie for Leviathan, you need R2-D2 for like 5 things, you need BB-8 for JTR and Rey, and then T3, Revan, Lobot, Leia. You end up just getting the whole team for free after you get, you know, those other 5 projects. Overall, in custom missions on defense, it has been pretty much figured out for the most part. There isn't really a version of it that stops Bad Batch, which is why Bad Batch is in the higher category, but still a team nonetheless. For a lot of people out there, Bad Batch is going to be needed to beat 5 teams on defense, and they can only do it once. Speaking of teams that get beat by Bad Batch, next up is going to be Geonosians, a team that, again, you really need them if you want to be getting Watt, or at least if you want to be helping your guild get Watt. And they can beat some of the other stuff, but they require a higher relic investment to even be able to beat some of the teams that are just tankier, kind of maybe if you're running into some BAM leads or things like that. But overall, they can just be really annoying to deal with on defense, especially if you're in lower areas of Grand Arena. Next up is going to be Sana, and it pains me a little bit to put Sana this low, and the reason why, and we're going to run into this multiple times with Rebel teams, the reason why Sana is getting kicked all the way to the curb to C tier is because the characters that she probably wants to use that are better than, say, Lando are already in better teams. So basically what I'm getting at with this is, if you don't have Saw, and you have no intentions to get Saw, and you got Sana for Afra, maybe you don't put in Lando or Rolo here. You put in like Cara Dune and Kyle Katarn or something to that extent. Actually, don't do Kyle Katarn. He's not a scoundrel. That'll end poorly for you. But you can put in Cara Dune to make the team better than it already is. And again, we're going to see that later on, both with Admiral Akbar as well as Mon Mothma. Next up is going to be Final Order. I really do like this team. I actually like this team a lot. It is pretty much the definition of glass cannon. You get to go first, and if Hux can essentially kill one important character right off the bat, you have the match. We've actually used this against an Afra that someone put on defense, which don't do that because this works perfectly. My only issue is typically the first character that you're going to have to kill is going to be a tank, and then the rest of the team just completely destroys you because you don't really have the tools necessary to be able to take other things out. Again, I really like it. It just kind of doesn't stack up when it comes to their teams, and ultimately is a transitionary team because most of these characters are going to get thrown with SLKR at one point or another. Next up is going to be our Mon Mothma team, who again is going to suffer with a similar problem to Sana. A lot of the better characters she wants to use in her team are going right now to Saw because he's kind of more the premium Rebel fighter team. But if you need to, you can kick out Wedge to throw in Cara Dune or even Drogon or whoever it is to get this team to a higher level. Ultimately, there's a lot of turn meter here. There are just way too many solutions right now to this on defense. It is a real team. It'll probably steal some mana. Kyle Katarn has a wicked AoE, but ultimately it's not really pulling the most weight out of all the teams. Next up is going to be the Thermal Galore team. This is really the team that you're going to be using when you're going for Jabba, but you don't have Jabba and you need to put something on defense. Really hard to get full banners here just because they get so many thermals out. Boba's lead is a little bit of a sleeper lead because it does like 16 things despite being a really old lead. One of those things it does is it gains speed based off of debuffs, which becomes really unpredictable, so it isn't as great for the opponent that's going in. Typically very clearable, but at the same time, you don't really know what's going to happen or can recover quite well. Next up is going to be Budget Raylo. This team is bad. Don't build this team. I mean, if you have JTR because of JML, maybe do that, but realistically, Rey and Ben should be going with Rey. I know we're not talking about Galactic Legends, but the team isn't good, but we're making 40 teams, so it's there. Again, same exact thing as this team up here. If you're going for Jabba, this is what you use before you get Jabba. If you're going for Rey, this is what you use before you get Rey, and you move on. Next up are going to be Ewoks. Very similar to the Geonosians, they're required. You need them at least for 3PO, probably somewhere around the Gear 10, Gear 11, Gear 12 marker, depending on what you're wanting to do. Plus 3 of them are going to need relics for our good friend Leia. And really, if Leia is one of your only GLs, like one of your 1, 2, or 3, you probably do actually still want to be using Ewoks, because with Nisa, they do have quite a bit of extra viability. They just don't match up to a lot of the other teams that are better than they are. Next up are the fur bags, the other type of fur bags. I guess the Ewoks were the first type. Overall, the biggest issue that I have with this team is they don't have enough requirement overlap. Clone Wars 2 isn't really required for anything, and then Tarful and Zalbar Gear 12 is really the highest you need to get them for the required events. Not overall that great. And then even if you do take the whole thing to relics, it's still very easily solved by, once again, Bad Batch, who I think just beats every single thing in this tier very easily. Not a garbage team by any standards, but again, you're going to use it as a transitory team that you probably don't even want to take to relics unless they get a Datacron again, in which case I guess you can do that. Next up is going to be our final tier, and this is really kind of where the losers are. So again, don't feel bad about using these characters as transitory. Maybe use these as ideas. Maybe build up some of these extra characters that you don't have that were used elsewhere. And this is the bad comp. And I actually, gosh, I hate this comp. And not because it's bad, but because Queel and IG-11 deserve so much better. The issue is, Bam is running off and doing things with Bo-Katan, and Dash already has better characters like Hondo and L3 and Vandor. This is just kind of what they get. And again, you could promote this to a C or a B tier team if you're putting in Bam lead or something like that. But again, for the sake of the video, that's not really how this is going to play out. It's overall just not that good. And really, my bigger issue is Kira, Young Lando, and Young Han aren't really required for anything except for like TB missions, which at that point, pick some better characters like we've already talked about, like Seer or Cal or Saw or Night Sisters. The list kind of just keeps going on and on. Next up is going to be a Phasma team. This is assuming you're making a good Hux team, then this is kind of what's left over. Really don't use this unless you absolutely have to. I guess this is probably a really good team to use for all of you that's got Lightspeed bundles for SLKR and don't have a lot else out there. Realistically, a Relic team, a Relic level bad team is probably better than most, you know, Gear 9 good teams. So something to consider. Jawas, kind of a meme team, fits the bill. And last, and I guess not necessarily least, is going to be Akbar. And I feel bad putting Akbar here too as well. Because again, Akbar with the Omicron actually isn't the worst team out there. The problem is the characters that he wants to use, like R2, just ultimately want to be in a lot better teams. And you shouldn't necessarily have to put on 2 Omicrons just to get what would realistically, at best, be a B tier level team if you're putting in something like CLS in there. But ultimately, they just have better homes where you can be getting more advantage. If you're wanting to be tricksy and try to put people into a trap, it might be a team worth considering, but I would advise most people against it if you're just wanting to go for pure value and value alone. So that is going to be our tier list. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you again in 3 months. Well, more or less to get 2 days, but we'll see you in 3 months for this type of video. Till next time, stay awesome.